Job targets of just over 270,000 jobs for this year alone, regular meetings of subcommittees, and the promise that this wasn't simply another talk shop. But why should we believe our leaders? Many have said the entire event was nothing but a stage-managed affair and that it would fall flat on its face. Well, to unpack the issues, a warm welcome to the Fix, Economist Lumkile Mondi, and of course also Dr. Dennis George from the Federation of South African Trade Unions, from Fedusa. And then we've also got with us Rose Serumula, who is the Director and Transformational Coach at MindURMind. Ladies and gentlemen, a good welcome to you. And of course, Peter, as always, with me on the panel. Peter, I'm going to let you keep this conversation about jobs.
Yeah, okay. So what I liked about the summit was that everybody sort of stayed in the room. You know, there was nobody walked out in a huff, but they stayed in the room, but in their kind of trenches. And I'm not sure whether we're a different country for it having happened. You know, there are lots of things that we have to do, difficult things that we have to do together in order to find ourselves. And unions and business and the government are, you know, this is South Africa. We don't come out of our trenches. We just, every now and again, you toss a grenade over and see what happens. And I worry that we missed an opportunity to build trust. But maybe I'm being too pessimistic, and I'm not sure who to ask. Dennis George, am I being too pessimistic?
No.
Can South Africans work together?
I think you are too dogmatic. The seating arrangements in NEDLAC, it's labor and business and government. They sit as constituencies. But that also happens at the International Labour Organization, where labor, business and government sit and then they caucus together. But what is important is the engagement, what we normally refer to as social dialogue. And from that flows social partnership. And you raise an important issue about trust. Now, you would remember that trust was totally destroyed. And then we started with a campaign that Jacob Zuma must fall. And he failed indeed. And with the other people that is with him. The other ones that is still clinging to their position, we are busy rooting them out also. Because when Cyril Ramaphosa got elected, you must remember, you know, Labour's got a piece of him because he was the GS of the NUM. And then we had business. He's also a billionaire in his own right. And then on the third side is now government and the president. So when he came in, we also had time to understand him. And we spent about 18 months intensively working with him on the national minimum wages. And we fought Saturdays and Sundays. My wife thought that I had a relationship because I went to NEDLAC on a Sunday. But we started to get to know him and to understand what is his deep inner side and so on. So the level of trust between us is at a good level. I think this agreement showed, you know, that business and labor want to work together because that is in our interest.
Lumkile, I want to ask you, you've been through these processes. You've served on many government, structures. You were slightly critical of how the process was put together. You felt that it was stage managed. We know that SAFTU, who represents the largest trade union in the country, NUMSA, wasn't present at that dialogue. How big a dent does that make in our ability to get that social compact to work?
I think the compact is a long road ahead. I think we need to understand that in South Africa, we've got over 35% unemployment rate expanded. More importantly, this is a discussion about the insiders who have maintained the status quo and protected it. So this is really a social contract of insiders. There's an argument, Karima, that says perhaps the rush towards minimum wage of 3,500. A study done by Seeking and Naturals in Cape Town, based on Newcastle, shows that in Newcastle, particularly South African Clothing Textile Workers Union, did accept 11 rand per hour compared to 20 rand per hour that the minimum wage proposes. And in that regard, the Taiwanese that are involved in textile in that area have absorbed and created employment opportunities. So the issue for me is how do we absorb that 35%? And in that regard, it means that we need some flexibility around the labor market because this is what's going to give hope for the 35%, which goes to close to 9 million that are unemployed at the moment, expanded definition.
Rose, you're nodding your head at the word flexibility.
I am absolutely. I feel like the employers are actually push against the wall, and they're looking for alternative ways on not to be affected by the policies and all these rigid policies that are coming through. A lot of people suffer because of the employers then closing them out and considering permanent staff, for example. So I think it is affecting people on the ground, the strict, rigid policies.
Rose, one of the things that you spoke about last week to me when I had a conversation with you, you also spoke about the fact that the way in which our education system is geared is that children are not enabled to become in love with what they're going to do. They don't get taught about career options and so on. We are seeing young people as automatons who need to go and perform a function in the economy. And that's why you can't get entrepreneurs, you can't get industrialists, because there's no passion for what you do. People tell you, no, you must study this because that's going to make you money, whether the person is happy or not happy. You know, how should our education system be geared to get kids to go and do successfully what they're really great at and make money out of it and create jobs and opportunities for people?
You see, MindURMind believes there's a big gap between the education system and what is needed in the workforce. You know, so we believe that we need to bridge the gap in terms of the skills of the actual students, in terms of aligning their passions with what they're going to do after post-matric. So what we recommend is that the children are given self-awareness, self-development programs at an early stage, you know, from already grade 8, as we last spoke, you know, where we get the introduction of their interests versus where they're going to study. We also talked about tertiary being favorable instead of in-service training, you know, because we think the only way to do well is if you go to school, a traditional school. So I told last when we spoke, it's a 360 contribution. The parents also need to be aware that the children's needs are different, technological advances and all that. So we all need to come to the party and agree that we're living in different times, and we need to align the pre-vocational skills with what is going to actually happen at work.
Absolutely.
It all just seems so much that, Dennis George. I mean, so doing all these little finicky things to millions of people at the same time in a country whose infrastructure doesn't really allow it to happen, you know, to get to the school over the hill over there is the mission.
Yes.
How do we, surely Lumkile Mondi has a point. I mean, you've got, and Rose, you talk about a minimum wage. There's got to be some flexibility in there for people to come along and say, look, I can't pay 20, but I can do 12.5.
Okay, look, let me just correct something about Mondi saying here. 80% of this agreement, it's about the outsiders. There's only one section that deals with job protection.
Sorry, in your hand you've got
yes, this is the agreement. Now,
the job summit agreement.
There's only one issue that deals with my members, and that is job protection. And what we told the government and we told business is, listen here, we've got Section 189 of the Labour Relations Act. And the Act and the Labour Code and the Constitutional Code is very serious about this matter. It says retrenchment is the last resort. But what we find happening is some CEOs want to deflect their own weaknesses, and then they want to make in advance, no, we have to retrench 5,000 people. No, we have to retrench 10,000 people so that they can now create this illusion amongst their shareholders that now we are dealing with this thing. No, that's not the way it should happen. What we are saying to government, and they agree with us, they say business and labor must come together at the company level. We need to make our companies globally competitive. To deal with the issue of flexibility, we've built in flexible measurements when we did the minimum wages. Person have to do an administrative application to say, look, we cannot afford to pay this minimum wages, and so therefore we ask for an exemption. But you cannot get an exemption forever. Nobody can get an exemption for 20 years. I mean, that is ridiculous. You can get an exemption for 12 months, but then we must review.
But George, in a chronic unemployment, whereby we've got just millions and millions, is one issue when you've got luxury. When you've got luxury, you know what, I can afford to cut these deals. Here, we're in a crisis. And a crisis requires different ways of doing things. And I think for me, this summit, Karima, doesn't do that. It's like business as usual. It's about 270,000 jobs per annum. We're proud of it.
No, per quarter.
No, this one per annum.
No, because remember, we're getting to the end of this year.
Okay, let's take a listen, gentlemen and lady, to what President Cyril Ramaphosa had to say at the Job Summit.
For the economy to grow and for jobs to be created, it is essential that there is substantial increase in domestic demand. This means that South African companies, the government itself, and consumers must commit to buying local. If we do not buy the food that comes out of South African soil, there will be no farms and no farm workers. It will just be job losses. Is that what we want? No, that is not what we want. If we do not buy goods made by South African hands, there will be no factories and no workers. Is that what we want? No, that is not what we want. The most direct way for South Africans and South African companies to create jobs is to buy only South African products. And this is the time to put South Africa first. This is the time to put South Africans first.
That is, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa. Peter, you wrote a very interesting column in the Business Day that touches on this very heart of the matter.
I can't remember what I said.
You essentially said it doesn't matter. Beneficiation isn't as important as the President makes it out to be, because if we are to be globally competitive, does it matter if the hammer is made in South Africa or in South Korea? We need to have clients. We need to have people who buy our
we
things.
need people to buy our stuff, you know. And what we do here, my little point, is that we are good miners and we are good farmers, punto, you know, and we can process a bit and we can process the food quite well. But the moment you try and say to somebody, I'm not going to export this steel or iron ore to Japan because they're going to turn it into a screwdriver and it'll come back and we'll buy it here. But the moment you say, okay, we'll make the screwdriver here, you turn that guy into a competitor. He used to be a customer. And now he's a competitor, and he's already got more business than you have. So you may have your own little market at home, but our market's not big enough to sustain the industries that Cyril is talking about. We can help, but we can't. You cannot build a big, stable business on the South African consumer.
Is that true, though, Dennis, in all sectors?
No. You see, what happened is business came to us and people were talking about the low-skilled jobs. And they were saying to us, we've got a fantastic opportunity to do something with avocado pears. And they were telling me avocado pears make you lose weight. You know, so I'm buying more avocado pears than ever before. In my salad, in my breakfast, wherever I'll eat avocado pears. Then we grow the economy into shape. So what he's trying to say is this, there's very niche areas. Remember, we grew up in Cape Town. We had in Afrikaans, they said, the vruchtenskeite. The fruit ships used to take fruit from South Africa to Europe. Remember? And we exported these things, and people were loading these things in the docks in Cape Town, and how things were exported from Port Elizabeth and so on. So all these niche markets, what we have done was to say that is the sector interventions that we want to drill down into. But at the same time, and I think Peter will like this, that the mining industry, Gwede managed to bring these people together. That was not even written in this agreement. Okay, so this glorious social accord that we're all talking about is happening, you know, irrespective of what we did here, because people are sorting out agreements. What we need to do is to ignite South Africans, workers, employers, to talk to one another, to improve their businesses, and to make it more globally competitive.
Rose, what is it going to take to get that young person with no skills to come to the party? What is it going to take that young person who's got a passion, but everybody believes that if he doesn't have a degree, he's never going to ever get employment?
It's going to get real support in the schools. I feel like schools are left to fend for themselves. You know, there are no textbooks, the basic infrastructures, access to internet, data,
costs,
support for the teachers as well, because teachers now need to deal with children even on a psychological level. So we need psychometric assessments. We need psychological support. So we really need to get the resources to the ground, so that the children do not have to lack, you know, so that the children can self-develop. The teachers also are supported. The schools are supported on the ground, because that's where everything begins, you know, and then transfer of information. I believe that's where we need to start.
Peter?
Yeah, no, just a quick last question to Dennis, if I may. I mean, information being critical. The German model of businesses where the unions sit on the boards, how do you guys feel about that? Would it work here? I mean, it makes so much sense to me.
I love the fact that Lumkile is laughing.
That is where Lumkile and myself are agreeing.
Because, you know, the next time I see a headline in a paper saying unions fear job cuts, that never happens in Germany, because they already know whether they're going to be job cuts or not, because if they're on the board, they get the same minutes as everybody else does, they get the same board packs, everybody knows everything at the same time. Yes. Surely that would help create the trust that we need here.
Let me start to quote.
And don't use the word co-option.
No. It's Karl Marx, you know, talk about worker participation. Okay? The Germans call it co-determination. I won't call it co-option. So what we are talking about is two groups of people with different interests coming together and formulate a common vision that will, in the end of it, work to their best interests. And that is the model. I mean, fortunately for me, when I started as a GS, I was trained in Sweden.
Yeah.
And you know, the study
they have a similar,
the study of Bloomberg's showed that companies that is listed, that have co-determination or worker directors on their board, perform better than companies over many years. Yeah. And you can see that kind of model was written in South African law.
Okay, we have to wrap up this conversation, but I can't resist asking Lumkile, whose roots comes out of the trade unions. He's served in government, he's now an economist, he teaches the economy. Is that an option for us, Lumkile, and can we make it work?
I think South Africa is quite unique. It is quite unique because we don't see in our listed space a domination of black executive and black leadership. Therefore, the culture, the corporate culture that exists in South Africa is very foreign to workers. And workers find it very, very difficult to be comfortable in that space. And when you see professionals, how they struggle. There was a scandal last week at Alexander Forbes, where the CEO, a black CEO and CFO left. So these issues
are real,
are deep in South Africa. That is why we're arguing.
The only way to fix it is to force it. You know, you can't let it happen naturally. You've got to legislate it.
Peter, that's why the structural transformation economy is so critical. And the current leadership, the ANC effect, doesn't know it.
Okay, I'm going to take charge of the conversation. I'm going to call time to it. Thank you so very much to my panel, economist Lumkile Mondi, Rose, of course, who works with kids and also get companies to understand how the market works, and of course Fedusa General Secretary Dr. Dennis George. I must get used to that title. Thank you so very much for of course joining us here. Now after the break we are going to continue with this discussion on the economy, but beyond the economy we're going to unpack whether we have the right leadership to build South Africa.